On the show today, we'll explore how capacity building initiatives can improve Africa's workforce. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag #BeyondMarkets. You can also follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Ubodaga. Now, after extensive consultations with its stakeholders, the African Capacity Building Foundation has developed a new 5-year strategic plan that aims to support the emergence of skilled people and strong institutions on the continent. Emmanuel Nnadozie, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, joins me now from Harare, Zimbabwe, to discuss this new strategy and more. Emmanuel, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we go into your new 5-year strategy, I would like to hear your thoughts and perspective on the state of capacity building on the African continent. What is your assessment in terms of how the landscape, what the state of the landscape is right now and how it's evolving?
Yes, in the past 20 to 30 years, Africa has really made a lot of progress in building the sort of capacity that is necessary for achieving the development objectives on the continent. But regardless of all this progress and achievements, there are still a lot of challenges and capacity gaps that still remain to be filled. Especially with regard to having the institutions and the institutional capacity that will ensure that the right policies are put in place and that they are implemented and that they are also monitored and evaluated. The same thing goes with the human capacity, that is the skilled men and women who will be able to undertake development across the continent. We know that there are still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. Because the analysis we have done has shown significant gaps when it comes to the critical technical skills that are needed to really achieve the Agenda 2063, the Sustainable Development Goals, and at the country level, the country national development strategy. So the glass is half full. Progress has been made, but a lot of work needs to be done.
You know, I've spoken to a number of analysts and guests on this show, and we've talked extensively around the issue of Africa's institutions, Africa's weak institutions, and many of them, there have been diverse, responses in terms of what the main issue is. And the general consensus so far has been a lack of political will. Of course, there's also the skills gap, but for the weak institutions, I've heard it's a lack of political will, and that this continues to be widespread across the continent. Do you share that same view?
Absolutely. Institutions are very central to any development effort. As you know, you can have the right macroeconomic policies. You can actually have the human capital and also the infrastructure and possibly the financial resources to bring around about development. But if you don't have strong institutions, a number of things will happen. One is that it's difficult for you to actually articulate and develop the right kinds of policies, but more importantly, to be able to implement them. So the question of weak institutions is very central to the essence of development. But institutions, leadership, political will, there are various ways of saying the same thing. Let me give you an example. If you do not have a good parliamentary system or legislative capacity, then you will understand that the issue of oversight and issue of accountability becomes very weakened in a country. The same thing goes with other institutions, whether they are financial institutions, policy-making institutions, institutions that are required to really set the agenda or to be able to articulate the policies that are needed. So this is why ACBs is focusing very, very strongly on strengthening Africa's institutions at the continental level, at the sub-regional level, and at the national level, because we believe strongly that without strong institutions, it will be difficult for Africa's very, very nice strategic plans to be implemented and the results that are expected to be obtained.
Now, the ACBF has been in existence now for 27 years. Now, obviously, we have a broad idea of the kind of work that you do, but help us, or maybe briefly tell us some of the milestones that the foundation has been able to achieve since it was founded.
Well, we have achieved a lot in terms of creating certain institutions that are necessary for building the critical skills that are necessary, whether it's in science and technology and engineering and mathematics, or it is in the areas of macroeconomic policy making, development management, financial management. We have even supported parliaments across the continent. We have also helped to create over 40 think tanks across the continent. I think we're really proud of some of the things we have done. For example, everybody talks about the Ethiopian commodity exchange, but people do not know that it was as a result of a project that ACBs started many years ago that resulted in that. The same thing when you look across and see some of the key think tanks in Kenya, in Senegal, in Ghana, in many other countries, that ACBF is responsible for creating these think tanks that are helping the governments to make evidence-based policies and to be able to design the right kinds of policies that will reduce unemployment, create economic growth, and reduce poverty in the narrative. We have also worked very hard in strengthening the regional economic communities. Almost all of them have benefited from support from ACBF to establish policy units or to strengthen their analysis of trade-related issues and to promote regional integration overall. We have empowered women through our projects that we do in empowering women in agriculture, for example, or supporting women's organizations. I think that this goes on and on. The Nigerian Institute for Legislative Studies is the brainchild of ACBL. This has really helped the Nigerian National Assembly to become very, very strong in terms of their legislative mandates and in terms of their oversight functions in the governance of the country.
Okay, speaking about governance, now I know that you focus on capacity building, equipping people with the right skills so that they're able to do the job and, at the end of the day, build strong institutions. But there are other things like, integrity, efficiency. And we know that corruption is a big issue, and that is one of the reasons why we still have weak institutions on the continent. Is this also something you focus on, not just equipping people with the skills they need to do the job, but also harping on the fact that integrity is a big deal, being honest and, not engaging in corruption? Are these also areas that you focus on?
Absolutely. Because in our work that we did to analyze the capacity requirements for achieving Agenda 2063, we did indicate that there are key institutions that needs to be created or strengthened for achievement of the first 10-year plan of Agenda 2063. We also identified the critical skills that are necessary and how we can quickly build them, especially in science, technology, and innovation. But more importantly, we identified what we call the required change in mindset, which we are now beginning to realize that it is far more important than any of these other sub-capacities or hard capacities, even infrastructure and others. In other words, that there's supposed to be some sort of a change in mindset, revisiting the values, and including those of Pan-Africanism, self-reliance, and changing people's view of how things should be done and what it means to be a responsible citizen. And along these lines is the issue that you mentioned about good governance, but also the issue of fighting corruption. As you know, during the last summit that just ended in the end of January in Addis Ababa, the African heads of state were focused, the theme of the summit was on combating or winning the war against corruption. And so for us at ACBF, we were really at the center of having this discussion, and we provided our own views about this particular issue. And our view is that corruption is bad everywhere. It exists everywhere in the world, but it is bad. And it is something that has to be combated in a very, very vigorous manner. Because there's a saying that if you don't kill corruption, corruption will kill you. And it can destroy states, it can really harm people, especially those who are the most vulnerable in societies. But we believe strongly that to fight corruption, this is one of those things that has to start from the top. In other words, the leadership of a country, whether it's a president or prime minister or head of state, must be the champion of fight against corruption, which means that they themselves must, to start with, be incorruptible and will not be corrupted. Because that's what will help them to set the right tone at the top and help them to actually be in a position to hold others accountable. And this is why I'm saying that in addition to that kind of leadership, you need the institutions that, whether it's the judiciary or it's the parliament or it's the civil society, the media, whose role is critical in dealing with this challenge, that they have to be strong enough to bring about the kind of transparency and accountability that is needed to be able to fight the corruption across the continent. But we continue to provide the support to all these institutions so that they can do their job effectively.
Okay, Emmanuel, let's talk now about the ACBF's new 5-year strategy. And you say that it's anchored or it's built around 4 pillars. Talk us through that.
Yes. You know, overall, the vision of ACBF is an Africa that is capable of achieving its own development. So we are centered in trying to do this through different mechanisms. And so our 5-year strategy, which is 2017 to 2021, as you rightly pointed out, is built around 4 pillars. The first one is to really make sure that at the continental level, the development objectives are really articulated and well coordinated and implemented, whether it is the continental agenda or the internationally agreed sustainable development goal. So enabling the continental and sub-regional institutions to be able to really champion that development agenda. The second pillar is supporting the states so that they can achieve development results. Because for a long time, the African countries have really been able to develop strategies, national development plans, and all kinds of what you may consider to be their own plans about how to bring about development. But the moving from a strategy to results has never quite happened the way it should happen. And this is because of the implementation gap. And so we are really focusing our attention to help countries to deal with the implementation capacity that they need to achieve that. The third pillar is for us to now look at the non-state actors to see how they can more effectively contribute to sustainable development. And this includes the private sector and civil society organizations and others. And to help them to understand the agenda, first of all, and secondly, to become more properly organized, strengthen their umbrella organizations so they can play a more effective role. And last but not the least is leveraging knowledge services, making sure that the accumulation of knowledge that ACBF has developed over the past 27 years is something that we can leverage to help in providing solutions to development challenges, not just in capacity development, but in development overall. So these are the 4 pillars that we are focusing on. But we intend to do this in a number of ways. One is to continue to mobilize resources for capacity development for Africa. 2 is to continue our bread and butter kind of job that we do for the past 27 years, which is to provide investments and grants for capacity development projects and programs in the continent. And 3 is to be able to provide capacity development advisory services, because we know a thing or two about what works and what doesn't work. We can do that for a fee or in collaboration with a country or an organization. Okay. And number 4 is to ensure that we adequately leverage the knowledge that we have, providing knowledge services, knowledge products, and sharing this knowledge very widely so that it can influence capacity building activities.
Emmanuel, we'll just take a quick break and we'll pick up from where we left off. Thank you for your time so far. I've been speaking to Emmanuel Nnadozie, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. We're continuing our discussion. Still with me is Emmanuel Nnadozie, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. Emmanuel, thank you for your time so far.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to take you back to 1 or 2 of those 4 pillars that you mentioned, especially the one on supporting countries to achieve tangible development results. We know that the SDGs, that is still on. Before that, we had the Millennial Development Goals that didn't have the desired impact that the countries that undertook them wanted it to have. But I'm thinking, is this going to play a complementary role to the SDG, for instance, or is it going to be a totally different approach?
No, actually, it is going to support the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the achievement of those goals. If you look at the SDGs and you look at the Agenda 2063 of Africa, you would realize that they are so parallel, they are so almost similar to each other. And the reason is because, I mean, as someone who is privileged to have been involved in both initiatives before I came to ACBs, we deliberately made sure that the Africa's common position going into the SDGs were derived from the Agenda 2063. And so everything is reflected there. The only major difference is that the SDGs does not deal with issues of regional integration, which the Agenda 2063 does deal with. So naturally, the ACBF strategy is designed completely to support the implementation of the Agenda 2063, and not just an agenda that is out there. But at the same time, it's also designed to help countries to domesticate and align their own national development strategies with this continental agenda, as well as internationally agreed agenda as well of the Sustainable Development Goals. So ACBF strategy, whether it is in terms of supporting the continental at the continental level or providing countries with, as you said, tangible support to achieve development results, is exactly and completely in line with the overall continental agenda.
Now, the plan also seeks to have the private sector and civil society organizations play a bigger role in development initiatives across the continent. To what extent would you say right now that they're involved, and would you say that a lot more needs to be done? We need a lot more contribution from these two groups.
Yes, I can say that the private sector has not really stepped up as it should. The civil society, their own achievements are also a bit mixed, because there are some that are directly involved in supporting development efforts. But by and large, I believe that they have played a more role. But we believe that there's room for improvement, that they can scale up their support to both at the at the country level or at the continental level to promote development there. But the private sector, we believe the potential is huge, but for some reason, given the nature of the private sector, we have not been able to really have that sector to fulfill its potential. And so what we're trying to do is to ensure that the private sector organizations, at the continental level or the country level, whether they are chambers of commerce or the Nepal Business Foundation or the other kinds of private sector umbrella organizations, to strengthen their capacity so that they can actually be able to have a much more effective engagement with public policymakers in order to be on the table when these things are discussed. Because one of the reasons why the African private sector has not been able to become as effective as they should be is that they are not often involved in the decisions that have an impact on them. And they have not been able to capitalize upon some of the initiatives that can benefit them, whether it's in terms of development projects or programs, whether it is at the country level or at the continental level. So reinforcing this engagement and this participation in policy making and in the development discourse as a whole is something that we are determined to support.
Let's talk about the issue of donor fatigue. Now, we know that the capacity building landscape is changing. Also, the priorities of the traditional donors themselves are also changing. We've heard a lot about nationalism and, the U.S. talking about, putting America first. Some countries have called on their governments to step down on, international aid. So for the foundation, how are you expanding or diversifying your financial resources at this time?
Well, yes, we are doing our best to find various sources of funding, because as you know, if we don't have resources, we cannot effectively support capacity development in the same way that we have done across the country. And so we are now looking at various other sources of funding. Some of them will be in terms of grants, others will be in terms of contributions for membership in ACBs, and of course, others will be getting fee for service or being paid for the services to raise revenue. But also we have an endowment that we have established, which we hope that some well-intentioned philanthropists or organizations will support that because of the sort of noble effort that we have engaged in. But let me point out, and this is a very important thing that you have mentioned, that there's what I consider to be some kind of short-sightedness in some of the reactions that we're getting from partners development partners, some of them, not all of them, in the sense of thinking that it is okay to reduce development support or assistance. To me, it is short-sighted for a number of reasons. One is, if we don't tackle youth unemployment in Africa in a decisive and a collective manner, it becomes a global challenge. Everybody will be faced with it. Europeans are worried about migration, and I've often reminded them that if Africa has nothing but its raw materials to export, it will also export its young people. Therefore, we have to have a solution to the root causes of the problem, which involves economic transformation, industrialization, to create the sort of jobs that will keep the young Africans here in Africa and stop them from migrating. That's one. Number two is issue of security. We've seen the terrorism rising in many places, and we know that the driver of this is often hopelessness and unemployment. People who become vulnerable to be employed by those who don't want them to be employing them. So it's short-sighted for not to have the support that you need to invest in the kind of education systems like we are promoting that will make sure that when African young people get education, they are employable or they can be self-employable. So it seems to me that our partners have to relook at the policies they are making to ensure that when they provide support to the continent, it is an investment in global security and it's an investment in a better economic outcomes for everybody else.
Emmanuel, I've heard some Western leaders say that, yes, Africa does need or can do with that additional support, but they need to see Africa taking ownership of its issues. They need to see Africa, taking responsibility and being in the forefront of some of these challenges, and then, of course, now having additional help from outside of the continent. Would you say that Africa is taking ownership of these issues?
Yes, many countries are doing that, and we're very happy to see examples of where things are working. The leadership is really providing visionary and accountable leadership, because you're absolutely correct. In the final analysis, Africans cannot expect anybody else to come and develop the continent. And this is why our vision is an Africa that is capable of promoting its own development. In many countries, we are seeing very good results, where resources are properly used in an accountable manner. In other words, economies are growing, and young people are getting jobs, and poverty is being reduced. But I cannot say that for all the countries in the continent. But also keep in mind that countries such as Somalia, such as Guinea-Bissau, such as a few others, South Sudan and the rest of them, that have been mired in conflict. It is difficult for us not to make a strong argument for support in order for them to be able to pick up the pieces and be able to move along. I'm not saying that African countries should continue to be dependent on external support. No, that is actually not the way to go. But things like infrastructure development requires a lot of support that goes beyond the resources that African countries can mobilize themselves. Therefore, international intervention through investments, not necessarily through grants or development assistance, are things that they should pay attention. But more importantly, being able to have access to external markets and being able to produce goods other than raw materials to be able to sell to others in the world is very, very important for Africa's development.
Okay, now finally, we have about just 2 minutes left. Let's move on. Let's talk about what the foundation is doing with the AFDB. I know that there's also a lot of focus on education, STEM particularly. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, we are doing a whole lot of things. As you know, the AFDB is one of the original founders of ACBs 27 years ago. And we have enjoyed what I would consider to be a very, very mutually beneficial relationship that's actually exemplary in many regards. The AFDB has strongly supported ACBs and continues to do so. And we have also supported the programs and the projects of AFDB across the continent in many, many areas, whether it's in terms of looking at fragile countries and providing support for them, or managing projects for youth employment, or even for promoting tourism, or even to promote good financial governance across the continent, or even what we consider managing for results. So many things that we do together. But in particular, the area of science, technology, and innovation is an area where we know there's a scope for even scaling up in a very major way the work that we do, recognizing that this is a critical area for transformation in the continent. So the ADB and ACBF are working together on this. I just recently was in Cairo, where I was able to participate in a high-level panel during the meeting organized by the ADB, where I was demonstrating what ACBF has done in promoting female graduation or female participation in science, technology, and innovation. In many of the institutions that are there, we have very fantastic success stories of young women who have been who won international awards and who have been able to really have master's degree or PhDs in all kinds of science, technology, and innovation related.
Emmanuel, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today, and of course, all the best with the new 5-year strategy. I've been speaking to Emmanuel Nnadozie, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation.